I'm 73 years old, and the loneliest moment of my life came after my biggest success. That still feels strange to say out loud. I spent most of my life believing those two things could never sit in the same sentence. I'm telling this now because I don't have much time left to tell it later. Not because I'm dramatic, or sick today, or trying to leave behind some lesson carved in stone. I'm saying it because the house is quiet, the days are long, and memory has a way of getting louder when everything else goes still. Success is supposed to fill you. That's what I believed. That's what I worked toward for decades. When I wake up now, my mornings are slow. My knees remind me I'm older before my mind catches up. I make coffee for one. I sit at the same table I once promised myself I'd barely use because I'd always be busy, always out, always building something important. Most days, no one calls. There was a time when my phone never stopped ringing. I remember complaining about it. I remember thinking silence would feel like relief. I was wrong. In my 20s, I wasn't reckless or foolish. I was careful, focused, serious in a way people admired. I took pride in being dependable, in being the one who stayed late, who showed up early, who didn't complain. I married young. Not too young, but young enough to still believe that love, once chosen, could survive on intention alone. We talked about the future the way people do when they think time is generous. I told myself I was working for us, that every hour I spent away was an investment. That sacrifice was proof of love. At the time, that felt true. My days filled quickly. Meetings, deadlines, phone calls that followed me home. I learned how to think 2 steps ahead, how to carry responsibility without showing the weight of it. People trusted me, promoted me, needed me. At home, things stayed mostly fine. That's the word I would have used, fine. Dinners got shorter. Conversations became updates instead of stories. I learned to listen while also thinking about something else. I learned to nod at the right moments. I told myself this was adulthood. That passion calms down. That real life looks like this. Years passed without ceremony. Promotions arrived quietly. Titles changed. My name carried more weight in rooms my family never saw. I missed birthdays and convinced myself they'd understand later. I missed anniversaries and promised myself I'd make it up somehow. I missed ordinary evenings that I didn't yet know would someday feel priceless. None of it felt like loss at the time. It felt like momentum. My biggest success came in my early 50s. The kind people congratulate you for, the kind that makes relatives proud and colleagues envious. I stood on a stage and accepted applause from people who knew my work but not my life. I smiled for photographs. I shook hands with strangers who spoke my name like they'd known me for years. That night, I went home alone. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not peaceful, just empty. I poured a drink I didn't really want and sat down in a chair I hadn't sat in much. I remember thinking very briefly that something felt off. Then I pushed the thought away. That was my skill, pushing things away. The slow cost didn't arrive with warning signs. It came disguised as normalcy. My marriage didn't end in shouting. It ended in distance. We stopped fighting because we stopped expecting. We stopped sharing because it felt easier not to explain. By the time I realized something was wrong, we were already strangers who knew each other's habits. When she finally said she was leaving, I wasn't shocked. That's what scares me most. I told myself I'd rebuild later, that I still had time, that I'd reach out more once things settled down. Things never settled down. They just ended. My children grew into adults while I was busy becoming someone impressive on paper. They learned not to interrupt, not to rely too heavily on me. I told myself that meant I'd raised them well. I didn't notice the way calls became shorter. I didn't notice the pauses in their voices. I didn't notice until noticing was no longer useful. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It rarely is. It was a hospital room. White walls. A chair pulled close to a bed I'd sat beside too many times too late. Someone I loved was tired in a way rest couldn't fix. There were things I wanted to say, apologies that had waited too long, explanations that no longer mattered. I spoke anyway, quietly, carefully. I don't know how much was heard. When it was over, There was nothing left to do but leave the room and step back into a life that suddenly felt very large and very empty. Grief didn't come all at once. It came in ordinary moments, standing in line at the grocery store, finding an old voicemail, realizing no one would ask about my day. That was when the loneliness arrived in full. Not when I failed, not when I struggled, but when I had already made it. Success didn't protect me from that silence. It made it louder. There are things that can't be fixed now. Conversations that will never happen. Hands I won't hold again. I can't go back and choose differently. I can only see clearly what I couldn't see while I was moving forward too fast to look around. If you're listening to this, I won't tell you what to do. I don't believe in instructions anymore. I'll only tell you what I learned too late. Time doesn't announce itself as precious while you have plenty of it. It feels ordinary, replaceable, until suddenly it isn't. People don't disappear all at once. They drift while you're busy. And one day, you look up and realize you've been alone longer than you meant to be. I don't regret working hard. I regret assuming that love would wait. I regret believing that presence could be postponed. That listening could happen later. That success would somehow fill the spaces I neglected. Now, my days are quiet, not tragic, just honest. I water the plants myself. I fold my own laundry. I sit with memories that no longer compete with anything else for my attention. There's acceptance in that, not peace. Acceptance. If this meant something to you, if it felt familiar in a way you didn't expect, then I'm glad I spoke. That's enough for me now. I don't have much time left, but I have clarity. And clarity, even late, is still something. This is the truth I lived long enough to learn.